Over the 24-month period to December last year, and as in past years, the general pattern across the state in terms of the top 17 offences is one of stable or falling crime. In fact, rates of murder, car theft, break and enter and robbery are now at the lowest point they've been in more than 20 years. The only offence in the top 17 over the last 2 years to go up was fraud, which went up by 14.6%. And this is largely, but not entirely, due to an increase in service station drive-offs. Non-domestic assault, break and enter into businesses and motor vehicle theft are all down between 5 and 7%. The statewide picture, though, is not mirrored in every part of the state. And the biggest problem outside Sydney is the 79% increase in robbery with a weapon, not a firearm, typically robbery with a screwdriver or a knife or something like that. Nearly all of the increase in robbery in the Hunter happened, well, not nearly all of it, but a lot of it happened in Lake Macquarie, where the robbery rate virtually doubled over the 2-year period we're talking about. In Sydney, the inner western areas, Ashfield, Burwood, Canada Bay and Strathfield, have a few problems, with a 30% jump in household break and enter, 34% jump in stealing from a dwelling and a 23% jump in fraud. Outside the top 17 offences, there have been some big increases for possession and use of cocaine and possession and use of amphetamines, but since the emergency department figures on overdoses for these drugs are not going up, I think it's fair to say these are probably reflecting increased drug law enforcement activity rather than an increase in actual drug use. I should also conclude by saying a few words about about shooting offences. What I've got here are the 4 main categories of shooting offences that people typically but not accurately describe as drive-by shootings. The most common is unlawfully discharged firearm. This happens when someone drives up a street and shoots in the air or just fires off a weapon and the police arrive and they just find cartridges, but no one is shot at. The gun is simply fired into the air or randomly. That's the most common. As you can see, that's been in a sort of bumpy way making its way down since 1997. The one that is, if any offence is properly described as a drive-by shooting, would be discharge firearm into premises. This is this one here, if you can see it. It's not showing any consistent trend, but you'll see that there are big peaks that occur from time to time, such as occurred in 2000, 2001. We had a very big peak in 2006, and we've just come to the end of a big peak, which started in 2011, went up to 2012, and then the last 2 months of 2012 came down again. So this is what people are responding to when you get these sudden spikes. The other 2 offences are shoot with intent to murder and shoot with intent other than to murder. These are the 2 most serious offences. They're also the least common of them. It's hard to say there's any trend here, but you'd have to say that the pattern here is a little bit lower than it was back a few years ago. I make this point because there's a tendency to talk about shooting offences as a group, and in fact the different components of shooting offences are doing somewhat different things. I've no idea whether we're going to see another spike in shooting offences. Time will tell, we'll just have to wait to see that. If any of you are interested in a map of the robbery offences occurring in Newcastle, I've got that here as well. Okay, any questions?
As somebody who monitors these figures closely, were you surprised by these results?
I'm endlessly surprised at the continuous drop in property crime. I mean, each year now for 12 years I've been reporting a drop in property crime, whereas in 1988 when I started this process, each year I was reporting an increase in property crime. The property crime drop is starting to level out. Whether it'll just level off at the current low level, remembering that it's much lower than it was 20 years ago, we can't say. I think the most encouraging news is actually the slow drop in assault that we're seeing. Some of you might recall back in the 1990s I was reporting huge increases in assault. They went up to about 2001. Then the assault pattern levelled off and refused to budge until the government started cracking down on licensed premises. And the drop in assault that we're seeing has come in significant measure from a drop in assaults on licensed premises, but also outside of that as well.
Property crime, what sort of, just name them off?
The big property crimes I'm talking about are break and enter, which is far and away the most common, motor vehicle theft, stealing from a motor vehicle, stealing from a retail store, stealing from a dwelling, all of those sorts of offences.
In terms of assault, so the alcohol factor or the crackdown, as you said, is working?
Oh, no question, but this is no time to take your foot off the accelerator. I mean, that's where most of the leverage has come from. In fact, if you look at the breakdown in assaults, you'll see that the big drop started in the top 100 premises in terms of assault. We've recently been checking to see whether or not publicans have simply become less likely to report assaults to police. That was one of our fears. Thankfully, when we checked just the other day, I got the results, and the indications are there's been no fall off at all in the willingness of bar staff to report assaults to police. So it looks like a genuine drop in assaults on licensed premises.
Do you find that
New South Wales safer? Is it a safer place to live now?
New South Wales is a far, far safer place now than it was in 1990 or 2000. Take, for example, the murder rate. The murder rate when I started doing this job was 2 per 100,000 of population. It's now down to 1 per 100,000 of population. The robbery rate's plummeted. The slowest to come down was the assault rate, and even that's starting to turn now. So really, the biggest problem we've got at the moment, this recurrent spiking in shooting offences in southwestern Sydney and elsewhere, and the long-term growth in some drug use offences such as cocaine. But other than that, I think you'd have to say New South Wales is a lot safer than it's been in years.
Does it frustrate you that the law and order issue is becoming a political issue between the state and federal governments?
Yeah, it's rather ironic, I think, that just when it ceased to be an issue or much of an issue in state politics, it became an issue in federal-state relations. There's absolutely nothing to be gained from this sort of debate. The only way we'll succeed in reducing international and national type crime such as amphetamine trafficking is with close cooperation between the federal and the state governments, and you know, simply trying to score political points off each other on the basis of law and order is just a waste of time.
And do you ever feel pressure from any of those agencies to sort of provide the information that would help their political causes?
No, never. No. Back in the dark days, 20 years ago, I might get the odd phone call. These days, no one rings me up. No calls from politicians. I think they quickly learned it wasn't going to work. So, no, I don't get any pressure from anyone about anything.
Just in terms of possession, you mentioned before that that's not to do it's more to do with increased enforcement.
Well, that's right. You see, the trouble with arrests for drug use is that when they go up, you don't know whether the police are getting more, active in enforcing the drug laws, or whether there's a real increase in drug use. In the past, the way we tried to check that is to look at the overdose figures for these drugs, and when the two go up and down together, it's fair to say that an increase in arrests means an increase in drug use. But what seems to have happened very recently is that the overdose trends and the arrest trends are going in different directions. The overdoses, for example, for amphetamines are making their way down, but the arrests are going up. So I'd be reluctant in the face of that to suggest that in the last 2 years we've got an increase in drug consumption.
So what's the main reason on the whole? Is it better policing, or are people, do they act differently towards one another in public? Like why are these rates dropping so much?
You mean over the long term?
Yeah.
Oh, combination of factors. There's a research bulletin on our website that deals with this issue. In order of, well, I can't give you in order, but the major factors were, for example, the heroin shortage, which took effect around about 2000. The price of heroin doubled and the purity of heroin dropped from 80% down to 20%. A whole lot of heroin users quit heroin or went into treatment. The second thing is that during the period between 2000 and up until quite recently, people who were leaving school had no trouble getting jobs. There were rising average weekly earnings. The third thing is that the justice system became a lot harsher. Despite what people think, the likelihood of going to jail for any of these offences went up dramatically across the board, and in some cases the length of time in custody went up as well. So there are a whole bunch of reasons. Better vehicle security. It used to be the case that second-hand cars were a popular item for thieves, but the second-hand cars these days are cars with immobilisers, so they're hard to steal.
Do you have any way of measuring whether people feel, despite the fact that crime's going down, do people tell you that they feel safer, or do they feel that crime's actually rising?
Well, absolutely. In fact, we just completed a survey on this and discovered once again that after 11 years of falling crime rates, most people in New South Wales think crime is going up. So it's pretty disappointing considering the volume of information that's out there, and since we now engage in tweeting to correct mistakes about what's happening to crime. Most people overestimate what's happening to crime, underestimate how tough the justice system is, but that's part of the course.
John, how significant? Sorry. how significant is the increase in break-ins in some Sydney suburbs? The inner west, you mentioned it, and the inner suburbs. That seems like a big increase.
Well, it is, yeah. That's why I say it's one thing to talk about the statewide trends, but there's no doubt that parts of New South Wales are doing it hard. And the inner west is one area where, see, break-ins are a real concern for people because they're already quite prevalent. I mean, they're not a rare offence. So if you're living in the inner west and there's an increase in break-ins, it's pretty troubling. So that's clearly an area of concern, just as is the robbery problem in Newcastle and Lake Macquarie. I mean, you could say it's only gone from 24 to 44 offences, but if you live in that area, that's bleak consolation. So I think that's a significant problem there.
Does the research identify any reasons for the trend?
No, we haven't looked into that, but when you get down to regional levels, all it takes is 2 or 3 people to go on a crime spree to push the figures right up, particularly in a country area, a regional area. 2 or 3 people can cause an enormous amount of trouble and the figures will fly up. If they're arrested and caught and put away, the figures will drop down again. But I wouldn't want to give you the impression that there is no part of New South Wales that has a crime problem. There are parts of New South Wales, the northwest of New South Wales, for example, which still have very high rates of most categories of crime.
How do these, across Australia, are all states and territories having a sort of a similar...
Over this
trend
long
down?
term?
Yeah.
Yeah, over the long term, virtually all states and territories have seen a drop in property crime. It's been a national phenomenon. I don't know, in fact we're in the middle of looking into or planning to look into whether or not the drop in New South Wales has been the same, bigger or smaller than in other states. But I'll have more to say about that when that research is done. But certainly the fall in crime is not unique to New South Wales. It's not even unique to Australia. Most Western countries at the moment are enjoying falling crime rates.
In terms of fraud, is most of that connected to service station drive drops? And if so, why is that still?
Well, it's not most of it. Most of the change is attributable to service station fraud. But I think service station frauds still account for about only 30%, 40% of all frauds. So, but the variation over time is mainly being driven by petrol theft, which is really a kind of fraud. And that's been tied, as you know, to the price of petrol. When the price of petrol goes up, up goes the service station drive-off rate. That it?
So could you hold up the map again? Just,
Sure. Just make sure I get it up the right way.
Can you just start, you had the other side, you were pointing at it with your...
That side?
Yeah, you were pointing at the graphs, is it? Okay, so just moving along the line. The top one. Just inside.
What is the top one? The top one is unlawful discharge of a firearm. So that's unlawful discharge of a firearm. This is discharge of a firearm into premises. And these two here, shoot with intent to murder and shoot with intent other than to murder.
Can you just show those spikes? Where are the spikes?
So the spikes that have occurred have been in 2001, you'll see there, another big one in 2006, and another big one in 2012 late last year. You want the map now?
Yeah.
So here's the situation in Lake Macquarie. These 2 panels here just blow up to these 2 areas here where a lot of the shooting, where a lot of the robberies have taken place. So you can see they're concentrated in the northern part of the lake area. You want a shot of the report?
Yes, please.
So you don't need me here anymore? Okay.